Last week, Moses' message to Pharaoh was uncompromising. Everyone leaves. Redemption, if it's redemption at all, means no one gets left behind. And if you can hear the sound of children behind Rabbi Adam, those are his grandkids. Nobody gets left behind. And then, this week, with the pretense of a single ambiguous word in the Torah, a rabbinic tradition makes a claim that Israel had sunk so low they didn't deserve redemption, and that maybe only 1/5 actually left, while the rest were quietly erased in the dark. And here's the irony. The Left Behind story keeps getting reused, less as theology and more as polemic. When Jews chose to remain in a successful Babylonian diaspora rather than return with Ezra and Nehemiah, when Jews embraced higher learning, innovation, and change in the Enlightenment, again and again, the story is repurposed to delegitimize Jews whose choices unsettled those trying to control the narrative. And then, with the advent of Zionism, a story about leaving becomes an excuse for not moving at all. These so-called traditionalists weren't calling Jews forward, they were justifying their own refusal to engage growth, rejuvenation, and ironically, return. Redemption gets redefined so it belongs to the past. So, this episode suggests that our verse is not so much about the Israelites carrying arms as the weaponization of redemption. Welcome to Left Behind. Welcome to Madlik. My name is Jeffrey Stern, and at Madlik we light a spark or shed some light on a Jewish text or tradition. Along with Rabbi Adam Mintz, we host Madlik Disruptive Torah on your favorite podcast platform, and now on YouTube and Substack. We also publish a source sheet on Sefaria, and a link is included in the show notes. This week we read Parshat Beshalach and focus on the correct translation of a single word, and rabbinic interpretations that rather than uplift and unify, try to diminish and divide. So welcome to Left Behind. Rabbi, how are you this week? You ready to come join the journey?
It's great enjoying the snow, and this is such a great topic. I'm really looking forward today.
So we really shouldn't be surprised about a tradition about there were those who were left behind. Because if you remember from the Haggadah, when the wicked son says, "What does this service mean to you?" To you, he says, not to him. When he sets himself aside from the community, he denies the very core of our beliefs, and you must set his teeth on edge and tell him, listen, because of this the Lord acted for me when I came out of Egypt, for me and not for him. Had he been there, he would not have been redeemed. Ilu hayasham lo haya nigaal. So we should not be surprised that there's a tradition that some people didn't meet the benchmark.
Right. I mean, that's problematic, though. Rabbi Riskin always taught us, how can you leave people like the Russia out? So that requires its own explanation. But let's go to the next source.
You know, sometimes when we encounter traditions that rub us the wrong way, we learn something. We learn about why we feel they're wrong. We have to dig a little deeper, and maybe we learn something in the process.
No question about it.
Let's go to that ambiguous word that I referred to. In Exodus 13:18, it says, "So God let the people round about by way of the wilderness at the Sea of Reeds. Now the Israelites went up armed out of the land of Egypt." In Hebrew it says, "V'chamushim alu b'nei Yisrael me'eretz Mitzrayim." Chamushim, for those of you who know a little Hebrew, comes from the word chamesh. It also comes from a chamsa, where you have that beautiful hand that we all share in the Middle East. I guess when you say hello, Rabbi, you're showing that you're not armed.
Of course, a hand is also five because you have five fingers. It's the same
That's
word.
exactly it. Exactly it. So they're all united. But here, the translation that we're going to start with is chamushim means armed. You know, I did a little research. Armaments and arms, clearly, when you have an armament, whether it's a sword or a spear, it's connected to the arm. But chamesh and hand and fingers, you have a handgun. It is clearly when you say hi, you're raising your palm open to show that you're not armed. There's a connection between the chamesh, the five fingers, the anatomy, I should say, and the weapons. But then we get to Rashi, and Rashi goes ahead and says the word chamushim means provided with weapons. He quotes the Mechilta, because he led them by a circuitous route through the wilderness. He brought it about that they went from Egypt. To make a long story short, we're going to see that the Israelites fought the Amalekites. And how could they fight the Amalekites if they didn't have any weapons? So Rashi makes the very practical point that here is a hook to hang on, saying, no, they left not only with jewels and trinkets and maybe some food, but they also left with weapons. And then he says, but there is another explanation. Another explanation of chamushim is only 1 out of 5, chamisha, went forth from Egypt. And 4 parts of the people died during the 3 days of darkness because they were unworthy of being delivered. So the Hebrew that he leads is metu b'shloshet yimei afela. In the exact Hebrew, it doesn't say the reason. For that, we have to go to actually the Rashi on the plague of darkness in Exodus 10:22, last week's parsha. And why did he bring darkness upon them? Because there were wicked people amongst the Israelites of that generation who had no desire to leave Egypt. Interestingly, wicked by itself would mean that they did not deserve to leave Egypt. But he says, Rashayim v'lo hayu rotzim letzet. So it's a double-edged sword. They were evil and probably didn't deserve to leave. They were evil and they probably didn't want to leave.
Well, their evilness was that they didn't want to leave.
I think that would be the straightforward explanation.
Right.
And so these died during the 3 days. And the interesting thing is, why did they die during the plague of darkness? So it wasn't an embarrassment. It was done very quietly, in the background, in the shadows. Now, what's amazing, and we're going to find many interpretations that are both uplifting and also those that grind us a little bit. The fascinating thing is Jonathan Sachs, in his commentary on the Haggadah, very in line with what you were saying a second ago with regard to Rabbi Riskin, he says as follows, and he's talking about the 4 sons. And where was a 5th child? The late Lubavitcher Rebbe suggested that there is a 5th child on Pesach. The 4 children of the Haggadah are all present, sitting around the table. The 5th child is the one who is not there. The child lost throughout marriage and assimilation. Rabbinic tradition tells us that in Egypt, many Jews assimilated and did not want to leave. The Torah uses a phrase to describe the Israelites' departure from Egypt. V'chamushim alu b'nei Yisrael mi Mitzrayim. This is normally translated as the Israelites went out of Egypt armed for battle. However, Rashi, he cites our Rashi. Instead, it may be related to the word chamesh, 5. The sentence could therefore be translated as only a 5th of the Israelites left Egypt. So, if you remember this in a few months when you're at your Seder, you can actually refer to this concept of the 5th, and I think, maybe you'll agree with me, Adam, that Rabbi Sachs is putting a positive turn on it.
Yeah, for sure. And you're not surprised because he always sees it as positive. And here he's putting a positive spin on it for sure.
So what he's saying is that while there were those who want to write off the 5, whether you mean it's the 5th or whatever, we actually include the 5th child in the Seder at the suggestion of a great Hasidic master of inclusion, the Lubavitcher Rebbe. But again, the discussion about this simple word revolves around, again, inclusion and exclusion. So let's go a little bit further because we've seen some negative and some positive. The most beautiful positive is from the Targum Yerushalmi. It's written in heavy-duty Aramaic. We could bring our friend, the Aramaic talker, to help us here. And basically what it says, and the word of the Lord conducted the people by the way of the desert of the sea of Suf, armed in good works. He says is uvdat tova. So he says they were armed, and they were armed in a good way. They were armed with ma'asim tovim, with good works. Fascinating that we're involved in a polemic, Rabbi.
Yeah, I mean, that's remarkable that we're able, the same thing that is bad according to one is not only okay, but it's wonderful, armed in good works, right? He takes it to the complete other extreme.
So it's interesting. We'll come back to a little theory that I have. It's the Targum Yerushalmi. He's a resident in Jerusalem. But the idea is, does Chamesh, what does it trigger? Does it trigger that there were those that were left behind? Does it trigger that they were armed with good deeds? Does it trigger us to remember those who aren't here but are invited to come? So let's go back to the source. The source did not come from the rabbis. It came earlier than that. It came from Ezekiel. And Ezekiel wrote, he was in Babylonia, in the exile in Babylonia, a generation before Ezra and Nehemiah actually left Babylonia. And he is the one who kind of rewrites and reimagines the Exodus from Egypt. And he is talking in Ezekiel 25 through 10. He talks about how God came and said to the Jewish people, to the Israelites, I gave you my oath. I'm going to redeem you. I'm going to bring you to a land of milk and honey. And then he gets to verse 8 and he says, but they defied me and refused to listen to me. They did not cast away the detestable things that were drawn to, nor did they give up the fetishes of Egypt. So this is the first scriptural reference we have that there was anything wrong with them. Then I resolved to pour out my fury upon them, to vent all my anger upon them there in the land of Egypt. But I acted for the sake of my name, that it might not be profaned in the sight of the nations among who they were. We've touched on this issue of Chilul Hashem before. Va'asa leman shemi levilti hachayel le'enei hagoyim. So God is almost forced, so as not to be embarrassed in front of the goyim, to redeem the people of Israel. But here we have Ezekiel, I would say, rewriting the story, the narrative.
It's remarkable that God saves the Jews to prevent a Chilul Hashem. Isn't that a weird rereading of the story?
But that we did in another podcast.
Correct. We've talked about this before.
I think it was called Filling the Void. But today what we're focused on is rewriting the narrative of the Exodus as if it were in a week. Last week, everybody leaves. Now, all of a sudden, they didn't deserve to leave. They didn't want to leave. They were debilitated, so forth and so on. So my sense, Rabbi, is he's projecting a little bit of what was going on in Babylon. That here we were in the first diaspora, and there were some Jews who, if they were to get the memo, we're leaving Babylon, they might stay. They did not want to leave Babylon. He was talking to those Jews. He was making a modern argument from the ancient Exodus story. And true enough, if we look at Ezra, a generation later, who is actually identified with the return, the first return to Zion, he starts in Ezra 1, 4 through 6, for Kol Hanishar, and all of those who remained, whoever that may be, let the people of that place render assistance with silver, gold, goods, and livestock. Does that sound a little bit familiar? That the people that are staying are showering those who are leaving and making an exodus with jewels and things. Here he's almost recast those who are remaining as those remaining behind in Egypt. It is truly impactful and amazing.
It's truly amazing. This is amazing. Correct.
And how does he refer to those who are leaving? He says, and all those whose spirit has been roused by God, get ready to go up to build the house of God. He says, L'chol ha'ir ha'elohim et rucho, let them go. And he says that those who are around them, he talks about their neighbors should support them with silver vessels again. So you really have this new dialectic where when we left Egypt, it was the remaining Egyptians, maybe according to this lens, the remaining Egyptians and the Jews or the Israelites who didn't want to go. Now we're leaving Babylon, and the same thing has happened. And sure enough, in Ezra 2, much later in Ezra, it says the sum of the entire community was 42,360. Rabbi, there were a whole lot more than 42,360 Jews in Babylonia. And we know because we celebrate a holiday called Purim, where those are the ones who remain behind. So I really think, I said this in the introduction, but it really did dawn on me this year that part of the source for this narrative was that it did become a polemic, and it was used the first time in the return from Babylonia. And it was used as a polemic and a disparaging argument against those who were not up to the task of leaving the comfort and the grandeur of Babylonia.
Right. I mean, and there it's more complicated because they refused to do the thing that was the right thing to do, which is going back to Israel and rebuilding the temple.
Absolutely. So in Deuteronomy 4, we do have this sense of a God who ventured to go and take one nation from the midst of another, lakachat lo goy mikerev goy, by wonderful acts and portents, by war, by a mighty hand and outstretched arm. And here we're starting to explore a few of the midrashic materials that start to flush out the narrative of those who either left behind or didn't want to go. So in the Yalkut Shimoni, it says, a nation from the midst of a nation teaches that these were uncircumcised and these were uncircumcised, meaning to say there were Israelites who were uncircumcised and Egyptians were uncircumcised. These grew long hair and those grew long hair. They looked exactly like the Egyptians and they didn't want to go, and had, in the words of Rav Shmuel Bar Nachman, the Holy One not been bound by an oath to the patriarchs, Israel would never have been redeemed from Egypt. So again, this argument against the Russia at the Seder comes back, that had it not been for, you would not have been redeemed. But it is fascinating that now we're starting to talk that they were acculturated, that they were mimicking the ways of the Egyptians. And if you follow my thought pattern, where this was written in rabbinic terms after the return from Babylonia, after we had a diaspora again, it was throwing a disparaging look at those who were not following the rabbinic model. And so they had assimilated. Had they been in Egypt, they would not have left.
Right. Right. So had they been in Egypt, they wouldn't have left. They were in Babylonia. They refused to leave. It's the people who are comfortable. Sometimes you're comfortable in slavery. Sometimes you're comfortable in luxury. It's people who don't want to leave, right? The people who didn't want to leave Germany in the 1930s, right? Sometimes people just want to remain in their status quo.
You know, and the amazing thing about it is we're now going to look at a verse that we all know, and we know it from the Haggadah. And what it highlights is we don't normally think about the slaves being redeemed as though slaves have to merit redemption. When people are persecuted, when there's an orphan, when there's a massacre, you go and save people. You don't ask questions, are they good, are they bad? And so when God saw the children of Israel and God knew, I believe this was at the burning bush, says the Midrash, I have seen the affliction of my people. And God knew, as I know its pains. Literally, these are the verses that we interpret in the Haggadah, and we interpret them line by line. God knew. That meant he saw that they separated from their wives and from husbands. We're feeling the simpatico of these suffering people. Alternatively, though, another rabbinic thought is God saw that they did not have good deeds for which their redemption would be warranted. Really doesn't even fit into the context of the narrative, because why is he interrupting Moses at the burning bush to say he's going to save these people? But again, it almost looks like they're finding an excuse to drive home the message that not everybody was redeemed. And maybe they're looking at an audience and they're saying not every one of us deserves to be redeemed. It's truly used as a polemic. And when I said that they have weaponized the Exodus, weaponized redemption, I was referring to something like this. And now, a word from our sponsor. If there's one thing we value at Madlik Podcast, it's reading texts and talking about them. That's why I'm excited to share something I created called Voice Gift Play. It fits in the palm of your hand like a remote control and clips onto any book. It's inspired by those old school museum audio guides, but this is personal. Voice Gift Play stores up to 10 hours of audio across 999 numbered recordings. You simply enter a number to record a comment, memory, or explanation, and enter the same number to play it back. It's perfect for B'nai Mitzvah practicing their laning, capturing Grandpa's favorite tune, or recording Chad Gad Yah in a voice that matters. Go to voice.gift. That's www.voice.gift, and use code Madlik for 15% off. Thanks. And now back to our podcast. So there's an amazing article that I read and that is quoted in the source sheet, and it's written by a scholar from the OU, or at least it's written on the OU's website, and he basically questions the other midrash that we've talked about in the past, which is that his name is Dr. Ari Zhivatovsky. And
he's a professor in Bar-Ilan University.
Amazing. And what he does is, if you follow the train of this thought, it goes on to say that not only do we have midrashim that say that the Jews were uncircumcised, the Egyptians were uncircumcised, the Jews had long hair, the Egyptians had long hair. It says that the Jews that were redeemed for three reasons. They didn't change their Jewish names. They didn't change their Hebrew language or their Jewish language. We'll see that there's a difference in a second. And they didn't change their dress. So we're going to take a look at those in a second. But before we do, he quotes an amazing scholar I have never heard from. His last name is Salant, and just like Rabbi Yisrael Salant, he was a Mussarnik. And he goes and he gives, I've quoted it in the source sheet, he gives an amazing interpretation of Chamushim. And what he says is, he combines all the traditions, but he gives it a positive spin. He says, if 4/5 of the Jews were killed in Egypt, clearly it was only the grown-ups, and it was not their children. So if there was not their children, who was going to take care of all of these orphans? And he says that the reason there is a discussion about both only the fifth left and 4/5 stayed and the good deeds is the good deeds of those who left was they took the orphans with them. And so I say to myself, wow, that is a wonderful glass is half full type of rabbi who looks at these arguments and at these traditions and says, I've got to stir up something positive about this. Right. And actually, that the Chamushim is not the fraction, but the righteous and kindness of Israel, that each person bore a burden not on his own. So thank God for commentary.
I love it.
Thank God for drash and commentary that enables the a kind of like a Rorschach test that enables the beauty and the happiness and the joy of a rabbi's soul to project onto the various commentaries that we've looked at and come up with something that is totally positive. I could not quote that piece of Torah, but let's now go to the tradition that says that they didn't change their names or language. We're going to Vayikra Rabbah, and it says, Rav Huna said in the name of Bar Kapara, due to four matters, Israel was redeemed from Egypt because they did not change their name, their language, they did not speak lashon hara, slander, and there was none among them who was found to be steeped in licentiousness. So again, what they are trying to do is, and it seems to me it's such a, there's no need for it to justify redeeming these slaves. The slaves who had their freedom robbed from them, but nonetheless, I think the only conclusion that you can reach is they're doing it because they wanted to have an argument for themselves in their day to convince people not to change their name, not to change their language.
That's for sure, right? This goes, I mean, that's Rabbi Riskin changed his name from Stephen to Shlomo. That's a sign of a commitment.
Yeah. Yeah. So I am going to quote a little bit from Rabbi Ari Zivotofsky. And he said that the triad of Jewish names, language, and dress is not referred to in the earlier sources. It's a very scholarly argument, and he goes over many different sources. The first time that he finds all three of them mentioned together is in Rabbi Elia Bachur, who lived in, the 16th century. And there are those that even call out the mention of it and say, you're making this up. It didn't appear. But I want to pick up with when this was brought into the Haskalah, when the Enlightenment came. And according to Rabbi Zivotofsky, this triad of Jewish names, language, and dress is not referred to again until the early 19th century, when it reemerged with renewed significance during that century's battle against the Reform movement. And I would add the Haskalah, the Enlightenment in general. And we have Chatam Sofer, the most important purveyor of this new midrash, he calls it. And he referred to the triad of Shem, which means name, Lashon, which is language, and Malbush, which is dress, which spells shalom. They spell completeness. And Rabbi, we're not making this up. We heard in the yeshiva world, this is a biggie. This is a biggie.
Zivotofsky shows that that this is a problematic source, but he's doing that because we all grew up that way. He grew up that way too. He grew up in West Hempstead. He grew up exactly that way.
The first thing that happened to me when I became religious, they said, "What's your name?" I said, "Jeffrey." They said, "What's your Hebrew name?" And luckily it was Shlomo. I love Shlomo. And that's what I became, because a Jew needs to be called by his Jewish name. And I had to change the way I dressed. Now, how dressing like people dressed in medieval Europe is a return to the original dress, that I don't know, but certainly that. But here is something fascinating, Rabbi. Let's talk about the language. Here Zivotofsky writes, in a strange twist, Rabbi Yekutiel Yehuda Halberstein, the Kloisenberger Rebbe, writing in New Jersey in 1977 and quoting the Chatam Sofer, uses our opening midrash to emphatically insist that one speak only Yiddish and not the local language, or, wait for it, or Hebrew. He argues that the unique Jewish languages that the Jews created in the various exiles, which were a deliberate corruption of the local language, meaning Yiddish, Ladino, Judeo-Arabic, Judeo-Milalem, are the true Jewish languages that should be preserved. So what he's trying to do is he has this wonderful polemic, but one piece doesn't fit in. The Zionists are the one that have reinvented Hebrew. The Zionists are the one who are going back to the Midrash and saying, but we actually speak Lashon Kodesh. And I think this is the most telling and fascinating, strange and amusing little piece, because it really does show that this was all a polemic, and it stays with us today. I mean, ultimately, we all have to decide who are the pharaohs of the day, who are the Israelites of the day, who are the Moses of the day. No one can decide that for us. But clearly, Exodus and liberation does get polemicized. And in the case of the Haredim, really they are not making the authentic argument. They are making an argument that they have created over time, and they have no more a claim to authenticity than Ben Yehuda, who rediscovered that amazing Lashon Kodesh that the Midrash referred to. So that is our study today, and I think we're finished.
That's amazing to pull it all around. The Zivotofsky and the changing language and how they've kind of corrupted that medrash. That is fantastic. Okay, everyone get ready. Parshat B'Shalach, we take the Jews out of Egypt, and everyone's going to know now what the word Chamushim is all about. Thank you so much, Jeffrey. Shabbat Shalom, everybody.
Shabbat Shalom, and I can only assure you that we were all worthy of redemption, and we will all be worthy of whatever redemption we make for ourselves. So Shabbat Shalom, enjoy the Parsha.